Good morning. My name is Anita Wiafe-Asinor of OML Africa. And in today's session, I'm going to be talking about setting meaningful HR KPIs purely from the HR perspective. Before we begin, I'm just going to briefly tell you about OML Africa. And then we will go straight into looking at setting meaningful HR KPIs. So Occupational Management Limited, OML Africa, established in Ghana in 2010 from the UK. And we specialize in HR and management consultancy. A lot of the work we do on the continent and in Europe is all around strategy, analytics, and alignments, and so forth. So some of our service areas include outsourcing. We provide HR and payroll outsourcing services. We do talent assessments. We have channel partnerships with quite a number of the leading talent assessment platforms and tools. We offer advisory services on HR analytics consulting, labor dispute consultancy on the continent, and collective bargaining and consulting as well. We do a lot of work around strategy and organizational development, HR risk management, audits and forensic due diligence, consulting for mergers and acquisitions, and then of course, learning, training, development programs we also run. Some of the examples of the work we do around the compliance is around the audit, terms reviews, contract reviews. We do all of those. We also consult around HR restructuring. We do stuff around generalist HR. We have a pool of associates, experts who we assign to various projects when we have HR projects. Training and development, we do both in-company, and we have a selection of public ones that we also run. We work across sectors in Ghana and Africa-wide, and a team of consultants with over 50 years experience with local and international expertise. And what we've tried to do very well is to fuse both our local and international expertise together in order to give the best HR compliance and practice consultancy. So that's just a little bit about OML Africa. So if you're just engaging with me for the first time, that. So moving forward, we'll move on straight from this webinar. If you wanted to know how OML could support you, we do a lot of work around HR strategy, which would generally look down not to just the strategy implementation, but we'll look at things like the KPIs, the matrix, etc. And then we also do the HR analytics consulting, and all that links into the KPI discussion we're about to have. So in March, we have HR analytics, and in terms of how to analyze and present HR data. We also have performance management analytics coming up for those of you who are in Ghana. We are going to be launching our e-training program later on in the year, where we'll be offering these online so other people in other countries who want to participate in the training can do so. And then we have our annual HR Leaders Conference coming up for African HR leaders on the 25th to 26th of April this year. Right, so let's get moving. So setting meaningful HR KPI, obviously doing a lot of work on HR, with HR, you come across lots and lots of issues around the practice and the industry. And if we talk about analytics, we know that we're talking about certain metrics that are measuring specific areas of our workforce to produce workforce analytics. But today, I actually want to focus on the HR department, on the HR practitioner, on the KPIs we as HR should be setting to measure our performance and to also help us to show our contribution and value to the company. So I'm not coming from analytics from the usual where we're coming from the workforce analytics. I'm actually coming specifically and focused on the HR function. So before we start, just to bring us all on the same page as to where I'm looking at with KPI, is just to define what KPIs are. So we know that KPI is a measurable value that demonstrates how effectively a company is achieving its key business objectives. And in this context, for HR, I mean, what measures does HR use to track and monitor the success of the HR operations, initiatives, and services? So specifically, HR performance metrics that are strategically aligned to the business and organization. So the HR KPIs mirrors the organizational performance for HR, but specifically, like we know, sales, marketing, finance, etc., do have KPIs that actually shows their performance. I'm coming from that perspective today, from the HR perspective. So they are defined based on HR outcomes and that are relevant to achieving the business and the HR goals. Okay, so if we agree that we all kind of know what KPIs generally are supposed to do, I'll just move on. So there is a difference between HR matrix and HR KPIs. So the term matrix is used as a measurement of any business activity. However, so for example, what's the percentage of employee turnover last year, or how much did turnover increase since the year before? What's our absent percentages? The answer to all these questions are matrix, as they keep track of the HR or the business activity. But when we talk about KPIs, we know that KPIs are also matrix. However, we know that not all matrix are KPIs. So it's only when we talk about performance matrix that are strategically aligned with the business that we're talking about KPIs. So in this session today, I'm trying to come from KPIs for the HR that aligns with the business, as I said at the beginning. KPIs can either be leading or they can be lagging as well. And I'm sure you all know what leading and lagging KPIs are, but just for the benefits of putting us all on the same page, I'll just go over it. So a leading indicator refers to future developments and courses. All right, these indicators precede an event. So for example, productivity is a leading KPI for labor cost. A lagging indicator refers to past development and effects. This reflects past outcomes of KPI. If productivity is a leading HR KPI for labor cost, then a sickness rate would be a lagging KPI. All right, so that's coming from Kaplan and Norton, 2007. Okay, so having put the definitions and examples there, I want to move into an example and go straight into these meaningful KPIs. So if we take the company Vitality, is a business that's trying to innovate in a very competitive landscape. The board has decided they will cut costs everywhere except the product innovation department. So how can this mission be translated into an HR KPI? Well, this can be applied to the recruitment cost. So the cost of recruitment is currently $500,000 and it needs to reduce to $400,000. In this case, the recruitment cost in dollars is the KPI, all right? The recruitment cost in dollars is the KPI. The current cost is 500 and the target for this is 400. This KPI can be applied to innovative behavior, which is measured annually in an engagement survey. The current score on a 10-point scale is currently 6.2. The target is defined as 7.5 or higher. So that's where HR want to take it. What does this look like? Let's have a look. In a table, it's easier to understand. So all the time for me, I believe in a balanced scorecard. I think HR should break its objectives and targets into the balanced scorecard. So if we just take the example that I have given you, you will see that the business goal is to cut costs. This is the HR scorecard. It's looking at process, customer, and of course, learning and growth. So from the example I gave, the KPI is the recruitment cost in dollars. Currently, they are spending $500,000. The target is to reduce it to $400,000. And the process, they want to reduce the grievance process from 60 days to 40 days. The customer, in terms of internal customer, want to reduce HR response time from 1 week to 48 hours. Learning and growth, increase innovative employee behavior. On a scale of 0 to 10, they are currently at 6.2. They want to increase it to 7.5. Now, what this shows me is that at the end of the year, when we have to look at what HR has been doing, we will be able to determine whether HR has been able to meet its KPI of reducing cost from 500 to 400, whether HR has been able to, in terms of process, reduce the grievance process from 60 days to 40 days. And that will be looking at the number of grievances that had occurred and the number that were resolved within 60 or 40 days. When we look at the internal customer, we will look at, has HR been able to reduce its response time? All right, so this is making HR more accountable to how long it takes us to respond to queries, to respond to inquiries, whether it's managers, whether it's staff, whether HR has been able to reduce the response time from 1 week to 48 hours. This is one area that a lot of the time we don't really look at, but it's really important. So we get a lot of criticisms for our turnaround when it comes to responding to inquiries, to requests for information, etc. So this is a very good KPI to actually have, to actually test how you are doing in serving your internal customers. And then when we come to the learning and growth, in the example I gave, the board wanted to increase innovative employee behavior. So we will be able to know at the end of the year, or even if we're tracking on a quarterly basis, whether HR is on track to meet the 7.5 target, whether it's actually able to meet the KPI of increasing innovative employee behavior. So right now, this is what I'm trying to say, that we set, this is an example of meaningful KPIs, and we're going to look at more of them following this example. So if we now look at this from the organizational HR strategy against the organizational HR scorecard, we can see alignment. It's also very important to really get into the practice of seeing whether it's visually, however way is easy for you, whether what you're doing or what has been set is in alignment to what the organization is trying to do. So we know from the organizational perspective, it's to reduce cost, recruitment cost. We know the HR KPI says reduce recruitment cost, and it's gone on to say what the current amount is, which the current cost of recruitment, which is $500,000, and the target is to reduce it to $400,000. When you look at this, it's very clear what the HR KPI, what the HR targets are, and we can very quickly see what the contribution would be when HR achieves this KPI. When we come onto the customer, we see the organization says increase internal customer satisfaction. We come to the HR scorecard, we see internal customer satisfaction by, we know that currently is 8%, we want to move it to 8.5. Time to hire in days, that's also important as factor of the customer satisfaction. We know it's taking 60 days, we want to reduce it to 40 days. We come down to the organizational objective on increase recruitment efficiency by decrease the number of administrative errors. So we come to the HR scorecard and we've got the number of administrative errors per week. So we're now tracking because we're trying to reduce our administrative errors. And we're also looking at the percentage of employees meeting analytical job demands or efficiently recruited. You can change this KPI. And we've set targets for that as well. And then when we come on learning and developing in this scorecard, I've put increase analytical competency of the HR, implement HR analytics by. Wherever I've put by, meaning that we don't just state it, we need to have a target and actually to measure. So here we've got the percentage of HR employees applying to do HR analytic practices. Currently it is not in place, so there is no current measure, but the target is to get 50% of the employees doing HR analytics. So when you get into the habit of comparing what you're setting, that's where when we talk about alignment, we mean looking at what the objectives are, have been set by the business against how we've taken that and translated it into our KPIs with measures, with targets. Okay, so if you have any questions, please do type them in the chat. Or if you want to make a comment, do so, put it in the chat box and I will have a look at it and respond. So having given you that table of example, I kind of now want to look at what really meaningful KPIs look like. And the idea is really just to give you some ideas to add to what you're already doing. And I've tried to break them down into some of the key main areas that I think we need to focus on. So if we take performance KPIs, you know, a lot of the time we're running appraisals and so on, but how many people are actually holding HR down to make sure that the process is done within time and it flows? A lot of the time when we go in to do analytics, performance analytics, we have to wait because the process has not been done within the time frame, and sometimes it can be as much as 3 months after the time is supposed to be completed before we will have the data to do that independent and analytics as to whether the company is performing against its set objectives, its strategy, etc. So one of the things I have here is, as a KPI to HR should be asking the percentage of managers who actually completed the appraisal process on time. This way, you will now know that, okay, if we had 70% of our managers doing appraisal within time, then we've got to make sure next year we're aiming for 100, or we should improve that by 10%. If you're not setting this as a KPI, you will not know this. And so each year we are delayed, we are late in when appraisal processes are done. And the same thing can be applied to employees. In a number of employees completing the appraisal process on time. By the process, I mean picking the form, filling it in, etc., and it being submitted, whether it's to HR or whatever your process is. I think you know where that fits in your process. How many staff, how many managers are doing that in time? Increase innovative employee behavior. I think that's a KPI we should carry because we want to keep making our organizations competitive. So we should be measuring this and having it as a KPI on our list. Human capital value added. So here I want to explain that here we are looking at the value of workforce knowledge, skill, performance. This measurement actually helps you to illustrate how employees add value to organization. So this should be a KPI for HR. The percentage of HR targets met. Are you monitoring and tracking the percentage of HR targets you meet every year? Percentage of HR initiative that are implemented, excuse me for my typo. So what percentage of your HR initiatives that are approved do you actually implement? All right. Percentage of HR manager and employee rating HR as efficient. Are you asking the workforce and your managers, your internal customers, to rate your efficiency or effectiveness? You can do this through survey to see how effective they think their HR department or HR leader is. A percentage of HR strategy implemented. You should all have an HR strategy. How much of your HR strategy have you implemented? And in highlighting the fact that we're talking about meaningful KPIs, you would then report on these meaningful KPIs. And that's more going to get more of an attention of the leadership listening, because you're actually focusing on outputs, on results that makes a difference to what you're doing, to the department, and also it's in alignment to what your business is trying to achieve. So if we've got an HR strategy and we're not implementing it, we need to be able to bring it up to the leadership and then begin to see how. But if we're not even tracking how much of what we are supposed to be doing strategic-wise has been implemented, it just becomes, it's just not being done. So that's one thing that can be looked at as well. It should be an HR KPI, it's a meaningful one. Then if we look on to service delivery, we can look at increase internal customer service satisfaction rate. So you will set yourself a KPI to increase your customer satisfaction rate, and you measure this through survey. You want to decrease the number of HR administrative errors. By what percentage? By what numbers? You will first need to capture the baseline as to where we are now in order to know what target you set yourself to improve. But we should be looking at administrative errors, administrative process, because we do a lot of it. That's a meaningful KPI to look at. Reduce HR response time or improve HR response time. So what is your current response time? Is it 1 week? Is it 24 hours? Is it within an hour? Is it within 2 hours? Is it that you don't have any? You need to set a response time. Response time is a really good way of us really also seeing how well we're supporting. It's a meaningful KPI to be having. Average time to achieve HR goals. I don't know about you, but I know that in the past when I was in paid employment, sometimes you have just these lagging goals that you just keep rewriting them, re-putting them. You just never get to doing them. If you are monitoring how, on average, the time you're achieving HR goals, you will realize when you have a goal that is just not being done, you'll be able to do something about it. But there's also a good way of knowing how long it's taking you to achieve set goals. It's a good, meaningful KPI. So if you're having unrealistic timelines or unrealistic expectations, you'll be able to address it. And it also helps you to be more responsive to what you can and cannot do when strategic work aspects are coming in from the top. Human capital return on investment. This is a meaningful KPI for HR to have. Return on investment ratio for employees. If you're not clear, if you want to know some of the calculations or the formulas for this, you can always email me afterwards and I can share that with you. But the human capital return on investment is a very key KPI that we should be having on our list. Percentage of HR services are being used. You know, you can look at that by department, by program, etc. You can align it to your organization. Engagement or satisfaction rating. So percentage of employees engaged or satisfied overall with a given aspect of their workplace. I think is a very important KPI. It's a meaningful one, especially now that engagement is such a priority for all of us. Then you want to look at effectiveness measures, which help assess HR's contribution. So number one, you have the impact of HR on corporate culture, the impact of HR on competitiveness, market share, and profitability. These are meaningful KPIs because they sit bang in the middle of the business. If HR is able to show its impact on competitiveness, market share, and profitability, we can know that our voice around the table is much more louder, and we are contributing a lot of value. Then we move on to the financial KPIs. And this is very important because we know that a lot of the time where maybe we looked at as a cost center, but I don't believe HR is a cost center. I think HR has a cost center just like any other department. But it's because we are not looking at the key KPIs, we're not looking at the key matrix that really shows our value. So sometimes it comes across that way. So I've also decided to pick some of the meaningful KPIs from the financial perspective for HR. So HR should be looking at the revenue factor. So here I'm saying you benchmark to indicate effectiveness of the company to show employee as capital rather than as an expense. So we're trying to shift that perception that employees are an expense and look at them more as capital. So a revenue factor, setting a KPI there will give a meaningful KPI. Training investment factor, I will not accept that, oh, we can't measure training, we can't track. It's not so. You look at the training cost per employee. You are analyzing the training function further for its effectiveness of training. If we're not measuring effectiveness, why are we sending people on training? So has productivity increased as a result of acquiring a new skill or knowledge? Has accidents decreased? With all of these, you need to take a baseline. So for example, we want to send the finance people on an advanced Excel training to improve their ability to use Visual Basics or something. We must know where they are now. Is it taking them 2 hours, 3 hours to use it? And then we must know we want to improve. We want them to do it within 1 hour. So you need to take a baseline when we're looking at training investment factors. Training, we also want to look at return on investment. So here we're looking at the total financial gain and benefit on organization. An organization realizes from a particular training program less the total direct and indirect costs. So you're looking at what investment have we gotten from the investment we've made in a particular training program or our overall training budget. And in one of my webinars I've done recently, I talk about training return on investment. So if you want the formula, again, you can send me a message. Reduce recruitment cost by, we're talking about finance. This is what the bottom line is. This is what the leadership wants to see you doing. We need to set KPIs, meaningful KPIs on costs. So reducing recruitment costs would be one, and you buy means what is your current cost? Where do you want to reduce it to? Reduce the cost of cost per hire by is another one, meaningful KPI. Reduce non-core training budget. So these are trainings that are not necessarily core to the delivery of tasks, but then we see that it's a good development activity for employees, but is budgeted for. So do you want to reduce there rather than reducing on your core? You need to track this KPI is an important one. It's a meaningful one. HR expense factor is another one. HR expense factor, we're looking at the total operating expenses of the organization, and we're trying to determine if our expenditures has exceeded, met, or fell below budget. Here, HR can really analyze this practice in terms of how it contributes to savings. So this is a meaningful HR KPI to have. Then we have the HR expense per full-time employee. That's also a good one to set KPI for. And then the cost per hire, you can look at it from to reduce costs. Then we come on to, I've got some examples around employment KPIs. So new hire 90-day failure rate. You can change this to whatever your probation period may be. But the idea is that we should be monitoring failure rate, because when we have failure rates, it's going to cost us money to go back to market to find this talent. So if we're tracking it as a KPI in the first place, we'll be able to see and be making adjustment. The whole idea of doing meaningful HR KPIs is not only one to add to making decisions about the HR, but is to measure the HR performance in its processes, in its deliverables. So this one particularly helps you to determine how successful your talent acquisition process is in terms of finding the right fit for jobs, okay? This new higher 90-day failure rate is a meaningful HR KPI. Average time to fill a job vacancy is another meaningful KPI. You can track how efficient the hiring process is in terms of time, resources used to fill a vacant spot, and you'll be able to make adjustments to become more efficient. Hiring process satisfaction rate. How many of us are asking candidates when they come in terms of the process, how useful or beneficial they find it. We're not tracking. Hiring process satisfaction rate, if you're not tracking, is a meaningful KPI to set the HR department. This provides perspective on how well the process works for from the employee's perspective. Time to fill. We want to know time to fill so we can either improve on the time or reduce the time. Time to perform. For me, of all the time to fill, time cost, I feel time to perform is a very key KPI we should be tracking. Time to perform meaning how long does it take the person we hire, the new hire, to actually meet performance expectation, and you will know what your performance expectation ratings are based on your ratings for your performance appraisals. So it's very, very important. If we know that it takes a salesperson 3 months to start bringing in sales, is a very useful information for us to have. So you should be looking at time to perform. So as a KPI, it's a very, very important and a meaningful one for HR to have. So having looked at what meaningful KPIs are, I'm sure you've gotten the idea of what I'm saying. I'm saying KPIs that challenge us, that assesses us as the HR leader and as the department. And so I also wanted to make a point of what's not a KPI. And I'm stating this because a lot of the time when we're working with companies and we start looking at what KPIs are, we get a lot of this. I thought it would be a good example to give, that there is a difference between these KPIs and matrix we're talking about and normal day-to-day HR duties and tasks, which are not KPIs. So organizing and maintaining the personal records is not a KPI. It's a day-to-day activity. Preparing HR documents, recruiting new employees, administering compensation programs. These are all day-to-day HR tasks. They are not these meaningful KPIs that I've been talking to you about, but they are equally important. They are just your day-to-day things that are expected of the HR department to do, but the KPIs are in alignment to actually specific outputs that really add value. So this is important, your day-to-day, but these tasks are not what we mean by meaningful KPIs or even metrics. They're just day-to-day HR duties. So if you have any of those duties as KPIs, you now know you have to go back and review. So in conclusion, KPIs are very important for HR, not just HR, but we know for the business. And when they're done the right way, they can enable HR to add tremendous value to the business in a very data-driven way. You could see that all the KPIs I've just spoken to you about have a matrix element, and if you are having them, you're really going to see give much more value, much more accountability, and be able to show what you're actually doing and the value you're adding to the organization much, much, much better than focusing on tasks. Setting goals using HR KPIs provides HR with a framework which helps to make better decisions and a more purposeful drive strategic business outcomes. I think you'll also see that when we set meaningful KPIs, it kind of focuses us, it gives us a very clear what our outputs are going to be than when we focus on day-to-day tasks as KPIs. So that brings me to the end of the webinar. So if you have any questions or any comments that you want to have, you can put it in a chat box, and I'll be happy to answer those questions. But if you also want to connect with me, you want to email me about anything, you can email me at anita@omlafrica.com. If you want to still find out more about what OML Africa does, you can visit our website, omlafrica.com, and you'll find out more information. Sorry about that. If you want to connect with us on our social hooks, you can. We're on Twitter. You can connect with me directly, Anita Wiafe-Asinor on LinkedIn. You can connect to me directly, or you can connect with the OML Africa LinkedIn as well. We're on Facebook. We're on Twitter. We're also on the YouTube. We've started a new YouTube channel where it's called Personal Messenger. We're going to be looking at lots of HR from the strategic and analytics perspective. We're going to have different people coming in to share different expertise. It's worth joining the YouTube as we begin our actions on that. So if you have any questions, you can feel free to ask, and I'll be quite happy. You can type questions in the chat box. There should be a chat box on your dashboard, and I'll be able to answer them. But if you don't have any questions, or you have questions which maybe you want to ask me after this, you can feel free to message me on LinkedIn, send me an email, and I'll be happy to answer it. I hope that at least I've given you a bit of, okay, someone's raised their hands. So let me see. Someone's raised their hands. Okay. Okay, so just type what you want to ask in the chat box, please, and I will respond. The person that has raised their hands. Thank you. You see chat, I think it's under more, and it helps you to see. I'll send a message. Please type your questions here. So I'm hoping that after this, you kind of get where I'm coming from. I'm trying to say that HR needs to set meaningful KPIs that actually shows value, that actually shows that what you're doing, and it's also meaningful, i.e. it can give, help make decisions. But normal day-to-day tasks are not KPIs. And I think you've got lots of ideas. There's lots of meaningful KPIs that you can share. I've just shared with you some of the key ones, and I focused on finance and performance because that's really what the top leadership are interested in all over the world. That's what the CEO, the CFO, the leadership, the top leadership, the board, they're interested in things to do with the finance because it tackles the bottom line. So if you have KPIs that are not tackling any of these, HR just becomes then to them as an administration office that's costing them money, and they're not really seeing the value. So in all your KPIs, in all the matrix frameworks that you develop, you really must make sure that there is a financial element that is meaningful to the business. When you're looking at performance, you also need to make sure you're looking at performance, KPIs, matrix and analytics. That also, again, links into the business. That's what makes your reports, your presentations, your proposals, that's what makes them meaningful. That's what's going to make the board, your leadership, start listening to you. You're not going to effect a lot of change just from thinking that people should just know that it's important to have an employee engagement strategy, or it's important to have a talent management strategy. Yes, it's important, but you can only show them through good KPIs, good analytics. When they see the numbers, when they see the results, it's much more easier to influence for change than just kind of explaining it to them. Someone is asking me, can I kindly explain why recruitment activities cannot be set as KPIs? Well, they cannot be set as KPIs because recruitment activities is a day-to-day activity. If this year the company needs to recruit 50 employees, it needs to recruit 50 employees. That's the task. It's not a KPI. A KPI will be, what I've said, the quality of the hire, the failure rate. These are the things that are important. But actually just going through the recruitment process of placing an advert and recruiting them is a task that you've been set to do a recruitment. But it's not outside of that. What does it tell me? You've recruited 50 people. That's about it. But when you move away, when you start looking at the recruitment holistically and start setting KPIs that is monitoring what you're doing in the recruitment, like some of the examples I gave you, that becomes a bit more meaningful beyond just filling the roles. Right, somebody's asking, Anita, thanks for the meeting. Is there a company need to right size? Can you have a KPI out of it? How would you put it? I'm not, please rewrite the question. I'm not understanding. If there is a company need to right size, can you have a KPI out of it? Just retype the question so that I can answer you. I'm not sure if you're asking if the company needs to downsize. Just retype the question for me, please, Millie. So yes, recruitment. To re-emphasize, recruitment activities are not KPI. They are your normal operational tasks. They are very important, but it is not a KPI. It's a day-to-day activity. Okay, downsize. So is there a company need to, if the company need to downsize, can you have a KPI out of it? out of downsizing? Well, you could want to do the downsizing without incident. So that would mean you want to do downsizing without ending up with any unfair terminations. So that would be without incident would be to do the downsizing without anyone taking you to employment tribunal or labor court for unfair termination. So that could be your KPI there, to do the downsize the company without incident. That could be a KPI. Yes, you can do. Any more questions? Do ask. Just to say, the separation of operational tasks versus KPI, I know it's not easy because we've become used to it, but you really do need to separate this. If you would like the slides, just message me and I'll send you the slides as well. And if you decide to come up with what you see as important HR KPIs for your department, or as a leader that you want to track for the department to help with your reporting or in linking to your analytics, and you want me to have a look at the list or something, you can message me and I can do that. I'm really championing HR analytics and HR values, so I'm quite always keen to kind of help practitioners to do so. It's part of our aims as a company, as an HR company, to make sure we're also helping to build the capacity of our practitioners. So if you have any questions, or if you just message me, I'll gladly help you, or input, or make a suggestion if that will be of help to you. So if we're not having any more questions, then I will say thank you very much for attending and participating. I think this year I'm only doing 6 webinars, but I can assure you that I'm hoping that they'll all be meaningful and useful to you. So, and I will obviously share on my social hooks when they're coming up so that you can participate. So thank you so much, and do feel free to message me after the webinar if you want the slides, or if you have any further questions that you want to share with me. Have a very good day and go and impact in your organization. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much. Goodbye.